I have cast on 15 stitches. I'd like to show you how to do ribbing. To do ribbing, all you do is knit one stitch, purl one stitch, knit one stitch, purl one stitch. But the thing you have to remember when you're knitting the continental way is that you need to flip your yarn over before you can purl. Flip it back to knit, flip it forward to purl, flip it back to knit, forward to purl, back, knit, forward, purl, back, knit, forward, purl. Usually when you take off your purl stitch, your yarn just goes to the back, so you don't have to think too much about the knit stitch. But you do have to think about the purl stitch and get your yarn in front of your needle. Knit, whoops, purl, knit. I'm ending on a knit stitch. That means on the next row, when I turn around, I need to purl the first stitch. It's also a good way to recognize which stitch needs to be purled and which stitch needs to be knit. The one with the stitch with a bump underneath it has to be purled. The stitch that is smooth needs to be knit. Purl, knit, purl, knit. Do you see the difference between those stitches? Everywhere there's a bump needs to be purled. Everywhere there isn't a bump needs to be knit. I'll show you. This one needs to be purled, so my yarn needs to be in front. When you start with a purl stitch on the first stitch, you need to be careful about pulling your yarn a little bit tighter on that first stitch so that it doesn't make big loops on the edge. Knit. There's a bump, so I purl. There's smooth, so I knit. There's a bump, so I purl. Smooth, so I knit. Bump, purl. Smooth, knit, purl, knit, purl. I'm going to knit back and forth for a couple of rows and come back and show you what ribbing does. Notice when you do ribbing that the fabric that you create is very elastic. It stretches quite a bit, but it sucks together naturally. That's just the nature of the stitch. Many sweaters, whether they're handmade or machine manufactured, have ribbing at the hem of the body and at the hem of the sleeve. For example, there's ribbing at the bottom of this sleeve, but it doesn't just have to be knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one ribbing. It can be any number of knit stitches, any number of purl stitches that create different patterns for your ribbing. So this is knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one. This, I think, is 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches of knit and 2 of purl, 4, and then 1, 1, 1, 4, 2. You can mix it up. It doesn't have to be plain. I'll come back after I knit some stockinette stitch to show you the difference between the width. We'll measure this actually. Okay, looking at this ribbing without being stretched, it measures just about 4 inches. We'll come back and see what stockinette stitch does. I have done 6 rows of stockinette stitch, and remember that stockinette stitch is knit on the smooth side, purl on the bumpy side. And I'm going to pull my needle out. Remember that I used the same size needle for my ribbing and my stockinette stitch. And you can see that the stockinette stitch is wider by about 1.5 inches than the ribbing. The stockinette stitch is not exactly a measurement because it's being pulled in by the ribbing, but it's about 5.5 inches wide, where the ribbing started out at 4 inches. So that's the point of ribbing, is to keep the hems of your sleeves or sweaters from being baggy, and to give them kind of a finished look.